Okay, amazing. So, good morning. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we're so excited to be sharing such an amazing project with you all. We will be talking about Voices in the Art project, or VIA for short. And this morning, this webinar is going to highlight our key findings from the project, particularly creative approaches for change, lessons we have learnt, their implications for gender-based violence, and of course, community-based work. And VIA has been funded by WAGE, Women and Gender Equality Canada. And before we begin, I'd of course like to introduce myself and my colleagues. My name is Gerline, and I lead the Voices in the Art project, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi everyone, my name is Thomas. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm a research associate on this project.
Hi, my name is Emily. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a project associate on the project. So I want to begin by recognizing the land where much of this project has taken place and where we're presenting from today. So the Immigrant Education Society, or TIES, is located in the heart of southern Alberta, and we both want to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to the Otipemisiwak Métis government, Métis Nation Battle River Territory, Nose Hill Métis District 5, and Elbow Métis District 6. So I'll start by giving you a little bit of an overview so you know what to expect for the rest of our hour-long webinar. So first, we'll give you a brief introduction of the TIES Center for Immigrant Research and the Voices in the Art Research Project. Then we'll work on defining gender-based violence and consider influences of intersectionality. Then we'll discuss our findings about what gender-based violence means to Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA+ youth, and we'll reflect on some common participant experiences. Then, as our third section, we'll review some best practices and recommendations of what we might be able to do as service providers and even members of the general public so that we can better support Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA+ youth, and we'll share some reflections about the VIA project as well.
So before we get into it, we wanted to share a little bit about the organization itself. So we're from the Immigrant Education Society based in Calgary, Alberta, and we've been serving newcomers and low-income Calgarians for the last 35 years. TIES has provided essential services such as English language support, employment assistance, various mental health programs, including counseling, settlement assistance, and specialized programs for youth and research. For us, we operate in the Center for Immigrant Research, which falls under one of the 5 key pillars of services and programs that TIES provides. In our center, we focus on community-based research, program development, and evaluations. So here we have an overview of our entire research team. This research project consists of a community academic partnership between the University of British Columbia, the University of Michigan, and TIES. And this partnership allows us to combine the expertise of both our academic partners as well as TIES, an immigrant serving organization.
So, what is VIA? VIA is an intervention through research project that intended to understand and uplift the experiences of newcomer 2S LGBTQIA+ youth using an arts-based methodology called arts-based engagement ethnography, or ABE for short. And over the past 3 years of this project, we've had a total of 45 participants take part across 4 cohorts. And this project aimed to gain a deeper insight into the experiences of newcomer queer youth. So VIA focused on exploring participants' intersecting identities, so those different identities that make up who you are, and that includes things like gender and age, integration into Canadian society, so that newcomer experience, social lives and relationships, and of course, experiences with gender-based violence. This population is more vulnerable to experiencing gender-based violence, and there is a lack of research and services tailored to their unique needs, especially in Calgary. So VIA has used the ABE method throughout, and this includes the use of arts-based methods. And we have seen numerous benefits of working with newcomer queer youth using this technique. And you can see some of the core attributes of ABE on the screen. Participants were given a range of art supplies, and that included a Fujifilm Instax camera, sketchbook, film, and etc. And they were then provided a package of prompts to help inspire and support with creating art. and the artwork provided a medium for discussing experiences which can be difficult. The artwork participants created was used as the basis for their interview guide, and this meant that the process was completely participant-led. Our participants had complete agency in how they wanted to share their experiences, and the artwork and the interviews combined yield rich insights on those experiences. And lastly, Abe encouraged creativity, and we received a lot of positive feedback from participants about using art supplies and creating artwork. Participants enjoyed the wide variety of supplies and found creating artwork to be healing and provided a tool for personal development, and many felt empowered in this process.
All right, so this slide serves to, we can follow along using our imagination on what it might be like to participate in the VIA project across a cohort. So each cohort spans about 3 months with one activity scheduled per month. So first step, participants begin with a detailed briefing session where they sign consent forms, complete demographic survey, and they receive the cultural probes or artwork. So we talked about how we can use these cultural probes, reviewed a set of prompts that might help spark reflection and encourage them to creatively think about their experiences and display them using their artwork. So an example of this might be, what does belonging or community look like to you? And then they had the opportunity to think about that and create some artwork with it. So then participants had about a month to create that artwork before coming in for a one-on-one semi-structured interview. So this individual interview provides participants with the opportunity to give some context and explain the reasoning behind their artwork, as well as share some other experiences that they might feel is important to them. The next step is for our participants to join the first focus group, which takes place with the rest of their cohort. We had the groups based on age, and the focus groups were a really great place for participants to come together with their cohort and participate in a discussion based on some emergent themes from the individual interviews. People could see whether their experiences were similar or different to those of others, and it offered them a really great chance to build community. Month 3, they had a second focus group where they had the opportunity to explore those themes in a little bit more depth and continue with that community building process. And then finally, participants had an option to showcase their artwork in an art exhibition. So we had one for the first 2 cohorts and then another one for our second 2 cohorts where participants had the opportunity to bring friends, close family, anybody else that they might want to share their artwork and their experiences with. It was an opportunity for cohorts to meet one another outside of their individual cohort. And it also was a really great opportunity for them to have some more opportunities for community connection. And we'll show you a little bit more about what this exhibition looks like later on in the presentation.
So in order to participate in this project, individuals must meet a few key eligibility criteria. First, participants must currently reside in Calgary, Alberta. They must be between the ages of 14 to 24. They must have sufficient English language proficiency to communicate their experiences. They must identify as 2SLGBTQIA+, or are exploring their gender identity and or sexual orientation. And they must have been arrived in Canada within the last 10 years. So here we kind of have a high-level overview of the demographics of our 45 participants. What we noticed first was most participants identified as bisexual, with queer being the second most identified. It's important to note that most of the participants identified with multiple sexual orientations rather than just one. We also found that most participants identified as women, with the second most being non-binary. And similar to sexual orientation, many participants identified with numerous gender identities. Third, we found that participants were primarily from Asia, with the second most being from South America. And this is quite consistent with immigration trends that we see to Canada. Fourth, we see that participants spent an average of 3.16 years in Canada. And then finally, we see that participants were, on average, about 21.71 years old.
So now that we've all given a brief introduction of VIA, let's get into the main focus of today's webinar, which is to understand that intersection of Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA+ youth and their experiences with gender-based violence. Again, as mentioned, newcomer queer youth have unique experiences and therefore face unique vulnerabilities related to gender-based violence. So today, we're going to discuss what we've learned through VIA and how we can inform practice. And but before we go any further, we want to actually hear from you. We'd love it if you could all join this Menti by scanning the QR code you see on screen or joining through the link available on screen and using the code. And we want to begin by asking, what does gender-based violence mean to you? We'll give you a few moments to respond to the question. And yeah, we can see the answers pop up on screen all together as we all engage in this task. And yeah, we're seeing things like absolutely exclusion, erasure, discrimination based because of queer identity, harassment, marginalization, compounding harm, inequality. Absolutely, yeah, lack of support, feeling less than, harm. Yeah, a few more moments just to add any more final comments, final thoughts. Fear, absolutely. Yeah, systemic, physical, emotional, sexual, cognitive, coercive control, harm, or violence. Absolutely. Power, exploitation, a lack of power, and harassment, either physical or mental. Great, absolutely. These are such great examples, and we're really starting to kind of contextualize and think about gender-based violence and what it means to us, and which will be really helpful as we go through the rest of this webinar. Great, thanks, Emily.
Well, thank you everyone so much for participating in our Mentimeter activity. It's really wonderful to kind of hear your thoughts and your input around how you understand gender-based violence. And we wanted to review more of the formal definitions of what gender-based violence means. So according to Women and Gender Equality Canada, people across the country experience violence daily due to their gender expression, their gender identity, or their perceived gender identity. This type of violence is known as gender-based violence. Gender-based violence, as many people have already highlighted, can be physical, emotional, verbal, systemic, or digital.
Right. So we're seeing that gender-based violence with our Mentimeter activity is meaning a lot of different things to different people. So we wanted to take a moment to highlight that we used intersectionality theory as a framework for this project. So intersectionality is a term that's coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, but it helps us understand that people do not experience their identities separately and their experiences separately. Instead, these aspects of identity, like gender identity, sexual orientation, immigration status, race, and age, overlap and interact with one another. So for Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA plus youth, this means that their experiences of gender-based violence are shaped by all of these identities at the same time. So, for example, comments about someone's gender expression are often not just about gender. They might also reflect racial stereotypes, xenophobia, and assumptions about newcomers.
So we found that participants in the project often interpreted the term gender-based violence as overly clinical. It didn't have much resonance. However, when the concept was unpacked and participants were invited to share their experiences of unfair treatment linked to their identities, many meaningful examples of gender-based violence emerge. And this reflects that participants understood gender-based violence differently as it was informed by their own lived experiences. So participants describe gender-based violence through an intersectional lens, shaped by factors such as immigration status, their queer identity, age, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And we found that safety management was often a constant concern for participants. They described the need to continually assess risk, look around, monitor their surroundings, make very careful decisions about where they go, who they engage with, how they visibly express their identities. And these considerations then trickled in and shaped how they access services, how they move through public spaces, and built relationships with people and communities. So within these overlapping identities, gender-based violence manifested in both subtle and overt ways, including harassment, misgendering, exclusion, discrimination, and stereotyping.
So before we go into our examples of gender-based violence from our project, we want to hear from you again, and we want to ask you about some of the identities that make up who you are. And of course, this includes like some of the things we already talked about, like age, gender, ethnicity, etc. So this Menti, same process as the slides before, and this one is a word cloud. So feel free to submit multiple options one at a time. And again, it's important to consider that gender-based violence experiences from an intersectional perspective, as these identities can influence such experiences. Right, amazing. Yeah, we're seeing so many examples already. So we have religion, culture, age, woman, Canadian, queer, disability, brother, parent, religion, able-bodied, trans, accent, neurodivergent, economic status, radicalized, heritage. Wow, these are great examples. It's great to see so many. Yeah, and like all these things that we're all sharing with one another right now are things that can, influence not only experiences, but of course, experiences with gender-based violence. Thanks. Yeah, so moving on now a little bit, we have some examples on the screen right now, and these were examples shared from our participants from the project describing experiences of gender-based violence. And we see from the quotes on screen that they are themes of navigating spaces which may appear initially safe, like queer organizations, but resulted in non-consensual and perhaps inappropriate curiosity where they experience scrutiny because of their unique identities. You see, Ren states, even if you are supposed to be in what seems like a safe space, there is always that probing that happens without consent. And the second quote highlights another perspective of gender-based violence, reflecting on experiences in their home countries. This was quite an important area of discussion that we found since many of our participants were very new to Canada. So many of them talked about extreme experiences of gender-based violence growing up. Yeah, it was very much illegal to be queer in both the places I grew up in and then every other place I've traveled to as well. Like, definitely cannot be gay in the country in West Asia.
So here we have two more quotations from participants describing what gender-based violence means to them. Liz states, "It's just always felt like you had to conform to the thing or what they perceive, what they think you might be, or how you act based on how you look. It's a very heavy form of stereotyping." Similarly, Fran states, "So comes into the fact that when you try to apply for a job or just get somewhere, you can tell immediately that they're judging your appearance or how you look, how you present, or how you talk a certain way, but it feels harsher." So these quotations show how participants experience gender-based violence through everyday stereotyping and judgment related to their gender expression and their appearance. Lewis describes the pressure to conform to others' expectations, which highlight stereotyping as a form of gender-based violence because it restricts self-expression. And Fran points to similar judgments in employment and public settings, where appearance, the way you present yourself, or even sometimes speech can be scrutinized, which lead to harsh consequences.
Now we're going to share some common experiences that were shared by multiple of our participants. And as we go over these experiences in the following slides, we encourage you to reflect on our intersectionality activity and again consider how you as an individual may exist in these same spaces.
So the first common experiences that a lot of participants highlighted was around public transportation. Many participants described public transportation, especially the train stations, as a place where they felt unsafe and a space where they often encountered violence. Experiences included verbal abuse from other passengers and unsolicited photographs being taken by members of the public. The quote you see on the screen shares an excerpt of this experience. Kamari shared how their androgynous image or how they were perceived led to people looking, judging, and staring at them. The second experience is naming the workplace as an unsafe space for people to be out and accepted. So many participants described being frequently misgendered, and as we see on the slide over here, very scared to ask other coworkers to use their correct pronouns. And this fear reflects the pressure shaped by participants of not feeling safe and in order to prevent facing further discrimination in the workplace, they wouldn't disclose their identities. So Blake's over here talks about not even bothering to ask other people to use their correct pronouns because this could affect their work dynamic and how safe they feel.
So the third experience that we want to highlight is this experience of invasive questioning. So as we see in the quotation, it shows how gender-based violence can show up through misgendering and rigid expectations about genders and bodies. The participant describes being questioned and judged for not fitting traditional ideas of what men and women should look like, even in a family setting. Having their body publicly commented on and their gender identity dismissed created a sense of discomfort and invalidation. So we see in the quote, you see, they said, no, why would you ask that? And I want to just highlight this last part at the end where they said, I tried to elaborate that, no, I'm just a guy. And they were like, no, but there are stereotypes for men and women, and you don't fall in either. So another common experience that participants described was this lack of inclusive spaces. Because of participants' intersecting identities, finding diverse spaces where their whole selves were affirmed could be quite challenging. So as Navi shares, I think even being in queer spaces, you still get judged. I was at a local gay bar. I kind of have this personal bone to pick with this local gay bar, just because every time I go there, most of the staff is white gay men. And it's not that I have an issue with white gay men, but I do feel like I get judged a lot more in that space because it's like it's supposed to be a space for all gay people, but most of the time it's all white gay men. Asa shares a similar statement, highlighting that finding safe space must actively be sought after or created. We see that they share, I started to realize that Calgary is, when it comes to queer spaces and spaces where people of color are, you have to actively look for it or know people. Like, you don't have a physical space. You almost have to create that space for yourselves wherever you go.
Now let's take a look at some portrayals of these experiences of anti-2SLGBTQIA plus hate and experiences of gender-based violence through artwork. So in these pieces, participants from the project further explored feelings of being perceived and judged in public spaces because of how they look, in particular around ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. Sky shared this very powerful image that you see here on screen, recreating an experience of someone taking a photo of them on the train. And you can see an X-ray image on the lower half of the body being depicted on a camera phone. And Sky further shared that this message was around public harassment. This piece represents my experience as a queer person. It's about public harassment and a discussion about different types of gender expressions in different cultures and ethnicities. The piece contains symbolism about transphobic rhetoric that believes that you will always be the gender you were assigned at birth. When an archaeologist digs up your bones in 1,000 years from now, they're only going to recognize the person's biological gender and what's in your pants. Feeling surveyed was another form of anti-2SLGBTQIA plus hate and gender-based violence. So you can see this, Obi created this very dynamic piece where if you look quite closely, there's a very common symbol of an eye across both pages. And Obi articulated that this was quite a distressing experience of constant unwanted visibility. There's always eyes that I feel like that's watching me, regardless of where I am, as if I'm like, that's an awful feeling to have. And then other times when I'm just walking down the street, I can feel everybody's heads turn and just look at me as if I'm like an entity from the great beyond that they've never seen before.
So this participant depicted in their journal, Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA plus 8. In particular, these sentiments are amplified within Canadian society and in an Albertan context. So the image on the left showcases prominent news headlines highlighting the anti-2S LGBTQIA plus sentiments that have been permeated into legislation. And then on the right side, this piece titled Disconnect, you see a rainbow collage on the backdrop with a phone on the front showcasing people gathered to protest racial injustice.
This slide shows artwork from Kai, who wanted to create a board game to depict their experiences of coming to Canada and how they've encountered gender-based violence in that experience. The cards in the game contain powerful statements about experiencing gender-based violence as a queer newcomer. So, in one of the cards titled Knock Knock Closet, Kai stated, coming out is not an option at the moment. Can't see a good time for doing so. For family's sake and for your sake, skip your turn and wait. And another card titled Queer Spaces read, going as a BIPOC queer person to queer spaces is often unpleasant. You're accepted as one thing at a time, either queer or BIPOC. Paid transit and tickets $100. Kai further shared, to try to understand the experience of a queer newcomer, you need to play Monopoly, a risky game, a gamble on a better life. This piece is aimed to highlight how being a newcomer overshadows being queer. It also shows how being queer as a newcomer unlocks further challenges, such as finding inclusive spaces that know how to protect people of color. And this work shows a small portion of what I had to go through to come here. And then once I've arrived, additionally, this piece highlights the need to go between homeland and new land, between coming out or not coming out, between settlement and unsettlement. The fears that I have as a newcomer lead me to leave things unsaid.
We also see that oftentimes cultural communities that participants belonged to was a source of additional tension. So participants also critiqued society's narrow definitions of what it means to be a queer racialized newcomer. So as we see, as Manu states, people sometimes don't expect brown people to be queer. Yeah, I don't know why. It's so hard for me to have identifiers like my beard. Some beards are usually associated with straight people. And as Kavi shares, also, just the intersection of being queer and African is always interesting because according to other Africans, it doesn't exist. They're like, there's no such thing as that. You'll hear that from a lot of African people, actually, which is that no, this queerness is a white people thing. These quotations highlight how gender-based violence is shaped by the intersection of race, culture, and queerness. Participants describe facing assumptions that queerness does not exist among racialized communities, which leads to erasure and invalidation of their identities. This first quote that we saw reflects the pressure to manage appearance and gender expression, navigating conflicting stereotypes about race and sexuality. And as Kavi's statement further illustrates, cultural narratives that frame queerness as a Western concept can deny the legitimacy of queer African identities. Another prominent theme is the idea that experiences of gender-based violence in Canada aren't seen as a big deal due to past experiences in their home country. So the following quotes that we see on the screen highlight how participants process and normalize their own experiences of gender-based violence. As Isadora shares, I've had a friend who told me, I got groped. I'm like, girl, being groped? Have you been at the train in a South American country? Impossible not to. I'd be offended if I didn't. But again, that's just because I have that defense mechanism that it doesn't stick with me. I guess I'm lucky, or it's my experience, or the way I was raised. But some people, anything, a weird look can be that feeling. And as Abney shares, I would get slightly sexually harassed every time I walked out of the house in a South American country. It's just nothing, you know? That doesn't happen as much in Canada, so to speak. But it's still something that is prevalent, right? And I feel like it's so normalized. I was like, oh yeah, the other day I was at the club and like this man just came up to me and he was like grinding on me. And I was like telling my friend this. Like I was just joking. Like, I think that's so funny. And she was like, girl, that's a little like that's sexual harassment. And I was like, oh, is it? These quotations show that participants did not always name or interpret their experiences as gender-based violence, reflecting varied and uneven understandings of what gender-based violence might look like. Both speakers describe experiences of groping and sexual harassment, but they frame them as normal, unavoidable, or even something to joke about. This minimization often functioned as a coping or defense mechanism, shaped by past experiences and social contexts where such behavior was normalized. And it was often only through conversations with others that participants reconsidered these incidents as harassment or violence. These accounts highlight how gender-based violence can be overlooked or misnamed, and how personal, cultural, and contextual factors shape whether experiences are recognized as harmful or not.
So finally, these participants highlight the idea that as newcomers, they're supposed to be grateful for life in Canada, feeling as though they cannot speak up about any experiences because they fear of being sent home. Nico says, and that's the part where they do not understand that my vision is different than yours because you are in a position in which you are able to do whatever you want without having to suffer repercussions in the long term. If I do it, I could be sent home the next day. Similarly, Canuck shares, I feel that's part of like a lot of what being intersectional is, though. It's a lot about being graceful and grateful for about what you have and where you have access to, especially compared to like the countries where we're from, where being out is a privilege comparatively. I don't know how you're supposed to be grateful for that all the time. So these quotations show how experiences of gender-based violence are shaped by constant safety concerns. Participants describe how actions that seem low risk to some, like being out or expressing themselves, can actually carry serious consequences for them, including threats to their own safety or threats to their immigration status. They also describe this emotional labor of constantly managing these risks while feeling pressure to appear grateful for the freedoms and access that others take for granted. Over here, Marcel shared this insight drawing, which made reference to their employment experiences as a person with various identities. Marcel shares, they white people take up a lot of space. And I don't just because of my identity, my intersecting identities. And that makes it so much harder for me to be in a corporate place where you have to perform, when you really have to be capable of fast-paced environments. But you can't do that when you know there are a lot of people who take up more space than you, and you don't know whether it is safe for you to do that. So this quotation highlights how gender-based violence and discrimination intersect with race and other identities within a professional setting. The participant describes feeling constrained and invisible in corporate environments because their intersecting identities limit the space they feel safe to take up.
So now that we've shared some key findings, we want to hear what you think. How do the experiences we just shared influence how newcomer queer youth recognize or perhaps define gender-based violence? How might this influence how they seek or not seek help? Again, same process as before. You could scan the QR code on the screen or join using the link menti.com and entering the code. Great, thanks. Yeah, we've got some great responses already, actually. Precarious immigrant status, absolutely. Definitely hesitation to reach out for help. A lack of identification. Youth may normalize experiences of gender-based violence and not realize the harm. Feeling grateful for being in Canada may result in not recognizing violence, not aware of resources, may not seek help, avoidance of public spaces, which restricts access to community, absolutely. A lack of services, especially I think tailored to that intersection or those intersectional needs. Not recognizing harm. The only way to cope then is to minimize or misname their harm. Worried about stigma, and feeling weak for seeking help. Internalized oppression, not looking for help, again, not being aware of the services that may be available, absolutely fear as well, not comfortable being out in society, which can absolutely then result into isolation. Fear of discrimination or dismissive responses from service providers. Much less likely to come forward and ask for support. It's already hard for men, let alone queer people, feeling like they have to go backwards to fit the ideal victim, i.e., in women's shelters. Lack of accessibility, pressure to perform, to prove yourself at all times, feeling as if attempts to help are invasive or not normal compared to their experience and cultural comfort levels, feeling they must conform. These were great responses. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. It was great to kind of. Is there another one that just popped up, Emily? Yeah, constant fear and vigilance, which can be debilitating, rob them of opportunities that Canada promises. Mistrust and challenges to feeling safe. Absolutely. We've seen that thus far as well with some of that, the negotiating of safety and finding safe spaces. Any last few thoughts, comments? No? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks. It was great to hear from all of you. Right, so now our last section of the webinar is aimed to share recommendations and best practices on how to support Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA plus youth as service providers. So yeah, what is it that we can do?
So our first recommendation is don't make assumptions. This includes their gender identity, their gender presentation, their sexuality, as well as their race, ethnicity, country of origin, and newcomer status. We cannot assume anything about anyone. Currently, we cannot assume that, for example, because they're a newcomer or racialized, they can't be queer, and vice versa. Our second recommendation is about pronouns. It's a general best practice to always offer your pronouns first when you introduce yourself, making it easy for others to share theirs as well. And people's pronouns are not merely preferences, but we also must consider that the person you are speaking to might not have any preferred pronouns, since pronouns may not exist in their language the same way it does in English. And if you forget or you didn't ask for someone's pronouns, that's totally okay. Just refer to them as their name, or you can use they, them pronouns because they're gender neutral, and then generally gender neutral language as a default is the best practice. And if they correct you, briefly apologize, thank them for the correction, and then you can move on. Our next recommendation is about creating safety through visibility and inclusion. So we recommend that service providers intentionally create spaces where newcomer to us LGBTQIA plus youth feel genuinely safe and welcomed. Representation matters a lot, as we've noticed that having a diverse team with various lived experiences reflected in the team can help the youth that we worked with feel very seen and understood. At the same time, think about how you can signal safety in your organizations. Visible cues like pride flags or pronoun pins, or even including pronouns in your email signatures can go a very long way. And this is particularly true for immigrant serving settings where newcomer queer and trans youth might not expect to feel affirmed in their queer and trans identity. So having those visible markers can make a huge difference. But it's also to remember that visible signs alone are not enough. Safety is built through everyday interactions and actions. So this includes listening without judgment, maintaining confidentiality, and responding with care. What matters most is that youth consistently experience respect and affirmation in their interactions with you and the organization.
Yeah, our next recommendation is around affirming practices. And we recommend that service providers approach their work with newcomer queer youth with an intersectional lens, cultural humility, and trauma-informed care. And this means recognizing that we're always learning and being open to understanding how culture, migration, race, religion, language, and family expectations shape a young person's experience of gender and sexuality. So we want to avoid assumptions or a one-size-fits-all approach and instead ask youth what may feel safe, affirming, and supportive to them. Trauma-informed care prioritizes safety, trust, and choice. And it's also about being mindful that some youth may have experienced multiple forms of violence or harm, including from community-based organizations themselves. One way we applied trauma-informed care in the Voices in Art project was by offering check-ins after interviews and focus group discussions and throughout the project. And we were clear that this was not a replacement for professional mental health support or a form of therapy, but these check-ins were conversational and casual. It reduced pressure and stigma around formalized mental health supports. And we noticed that this approach resulted in a high number of check-ins. And we reminded participants that it's normal to have feelings come up after sharing personal experiences. And we let them know that through check-ins they could access, we could provide further support and resources and answer any questions that they might have. Again, as we now begin to wrap up the project, we found that relationship building was key to its success. Having a strong sense of rapport and trust was central to the project, and it came from a very intentional process that our team engaged in. And this included small things such as having a table of snacks and drinks to ensure our participants felt welcome and invited into the space. But we were also thoughtful about eliminating any access barriers. So, for example, because participants were located across Calgary, we made sure to incorporate hybrid options for those who would like to participate, but perhaps weren't able to do the long commute. We also included things like transit reimbursement, and we asked participants if there were specific types of art supplies that they wanted. And we also offered to drop off art supplies at more convenient locations, such as the local university and the public library.
Right, so this slide, we wanted to share directly from participants about what advice they had offered for service providers. So this participant says, I would say don't make unfair assumptions right away. Ask before you go ahead with a cultural topic. Giving newcomer youth this space to kind of figure it out on their own a little bit, and then just being there, whatever way you can support them. I would just say involving the community into it, kind of on the similar topic of nothing about us without us, talking to the community and involving them into the decision making, since they understand their experiences best. It's learning from each other and learning how we can do better. So this next slide is what advice they had for the general public. I'll give you all a moment to read what they had to say. So we see things like being respectful, respecting each other's experiences. You don't know what someone's going through. Everything's about communication. Listen and not just assume that the thing that they know is true. Having patience. We're all learning, so just make room for that.
So as we come to the end of our presentation, we wanted to share some final reflections about what it was like to participate in the Voices in Art project and how we can move forward. So we asked this question to participants, and we'll share you in the following slide. So here are some quotations that participants shared with us when we asked them what it was like to participate in this project. So you can see participants highlighted that sense of community and belonging that was fostered. And this was particularly true for meeting other Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA plus youth. And it was particularly unique because folks haven't had that experience prior to this. So meeting folks with shared experiences and shared identities was very meaningful. Participants also talked about how impactful it was to connect with folks, to feel like there was kind of this larger sense of community, and to feel like their experience was validated and affirmed.
We also wanted to quickly take some time to talk about the art exhibition component of our project. So participants had the option to present their artwork at an art exhibit where community members, friends, family were invited. And we had multiple exhibitions at the University of Calgary and one at Calgary City Hall. And in total, we had nearly 200 attendees across these exhibits. And you can see some of the photos from our University of Calgary exhibit on screen. And these art exhibitions played a very powerful role in raising awareness about gender-based violence among newcomer queer youth by engaging the broader public. We actually found our participants actually created even more artwork just for the exhibition itself. And by presenting personal stories, lived experiences, and creative expressions, the exhibitions made abstract concepts of gender-based violence more tangible and relatable. They provided a platform for youth to share experiences that are often minimized or overlooked, helping both our participant and the audience recognize that the diverse ways that gender-based violence could manifest. And the exhibitions also continued to foster community. It created a safe space where youth could connect, see their identities reflected, and feel validated. So at one of our art exhibitions, we actually had an interactive poster display where we asked attendees what belonging and safety meant to them, to encourage them to further reflect on that topic of gender-based violence. So gallery attendees wrote that belonging and safety meant these things that you see on the screen to them. So ensuring my friends are safe and valued in society, coming from a place of care, understanding, and curiosity, and being with people that care enough to see me. So just some key takeaways we want to highlight from this webinar and from our project itself is VIA highlighted the need for genuine inclusive spaces where newcomer queer youth can build community and connect over shared experiences. So we saw that through our focus groups, the art exhibitions, and we worked towards creating the space and encouraging our participants to build their own. So we had participants reach out to us to organize a community potluck, and we provided the space at Ties for VIA participants to come together and participate in that potluck together. And we also saw art as a tool. And this was a very, very powerful tool, which I think which helped support and shape exploring things like identity, both through the interviews, focus groups, and art exhibitions, and also helping provide a medium to build community connections and enhance overall understanding of unique experiences.
So lastly, we want to leave you with a final set of participant quotes. Their advice for other Newcomer 2SLGBTQIA+ youth. We share these voices with you so that you might also share these voices with a client or community member. And as you see on the screen, you can use that QR code to scan and save a copy of our shareable resources, which includes some quotes like this, some resources for newcomer queer youth, and also some more general stuff about our overall project. But I'll just give you a moment to scan the QR code, take in the quotes, just highlight. You can still find a community that you can be a part of without forgetting where you're from. I take my time to figure it out, be a bit kinder. Just let things happen. Accept what you're feeling because it's valid. We can also email a copy of the resources to you if you would like. So you can just message one of the facilitators privately, and we can use that email that you registered with if that's okay with you. But they're also available on our website.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. And if you're interested in learning more, here's another QR code again that directs you to our website, to the Center for Immigrant Research. You can see some more research work that we're also doing. And of course, there'll be more information about voices in the art. We do have a little small window here for feedback, comments, questions. We'd love to hear from all of you again. And as we do that Q&A portion, I will stop the recording now. Thank you.